Over the weekend, the Slovenian capital of Ljubljana is taking center stage as the NATO Parliamentary Assembly gets underway. The issues pertaining to defense, deterrence and security challenges are being discussed by a number of policymakers and politicians. And to discuss some of these, we are now joined by Oana Lungescu, a distinguished fellow at Russi Institute. Thank you for being with us and making the time to meet with us. So my first question pertains to the recent provocations we've observed from Russia against NATO's eastern flank. Do you think that this means that Russia is changing the way it's engaging or confronting with NATO alliance, and what can the alliance do to effectively address those?
Russia has been testing NATO's air and missile defenses for many years. For instance, last year there were 400 scrambles of NATO air policing, not necessarily against intrusions in airspace, but against Russian military planes that were coming close to NATO airspace. So that's why NATO does have air policing and air defense across the alliance. But of course, what we have seen with the significant incursion into Polish airspace, followed by the fighter jets in Estonian airspace and the drone in Romanian airspace in the space of just a few days, is meaningful, and it shows that Russia is intensifying some of its attempts to test the alliance and to see if there are any weak spots, if there are any delays in response. I would say that until now, NATO has responded effectively in different ways, both by shooting down some of the drones in Poland and also by escorting out the planes out of Estonian airspace. But of course, we also know that NATO needs 5 times more air and missile defense capabilities. That was already known, so we need to redouble our efforts when it comes to air and missile defense.
But actually, one of the things that we saw is obviously, despite the fact that we've seen the activation of the Eastern Sentry policing mission, Russia didn't stop. And as you mentioned, it has sent a fighter jet into Estonian airspace, for example. So the NATO allies have committed, particularly when it comes to European allies, the French, the British have committed their capabilities. But could this actually be a case that NATO is no longer as strong with our US presence, considering that the US hasn't committed any of its capabilities to these policing missions?
What we must remember is that the man in charge of coordinating NATO's operations is an American Air Force general, General Alexis Grynkewicz, and he has been taking into account all the capabilities that we have. And of course, for instance, if you look at what happened in Poland, a lot of the capabilities and the platforms were actually American platforms, but operated by European allies. And that may be indeed a template of how things will be more and more in the future. It doesn't mean that the US isn't present, but it means that the Europeans are doing more, including with American capabilities. But I think NATO has reacted according to the situation, because we have to leave it to our military leaders to decide in every situation what is the best, the most effective and the most proportionate way to act without escalating the situation, but also sending a strong message of deterrence.
And so, based off these examples, this is the first time that Russia has so vividly moved to provoke NATO allies on its eastern flank. Would you say that this means that the rules of engagement with the Kremlin are potentially changing, or they need to change between NATO and the Kremlin?
The rules of engagement are NATO rules of engagement, and they differ from mission to mission and from situation to situation. It may be that because of all these recent incursions and incidents, military and political leaders need to take another look at how to make them perhaps more consistent, especially across the eastern flank, where we have a lot of different missions. We have the battle groups on the ground, we have Baltic air policing, enhanced air policing over Poland, over Romania and Bulgaria. So we need to see, together with Eastern Sentry, how it all comes together, and how military commanders in every allied country have clarity over what is the next step in any given situation. And sometimes it depends on the legal framework in every country. For instance, in Romania, they have passed a recent law allowing them to shoot down drones that are illegally in their airspace, but they still didn't have all the details until the latest drone incident. So I think it gives the impetus to each country to clarify their own rules of engagement and then to work together with other allies in NATO. And I think that's what's going to happen in particular at the meeting of NATO defense ministers next week in Brussels. Let me also say that there are ongoing efforts since the start of the year to put together something that is called the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line. And those are exercises with drones and counter-drone capabilities, including in Poland, with the US, with the UK, that have been ongoing to include more innovation into the sort of capabilities that NATO can use.
And so you've mentioned the pressing need for air defenses. So to what extent might we expect that these air defenses will primarily focus on traditional air defenses, such as Patriot batteries? Or to what extent might this actually be an example of navalization that you've mentioned just now, whereby, for example, Ukrainians might also lend some of their capabilities and some of their knowledge in order to bolster NATO's eastern flank?
Absolutely. I think we need both. And obviously, air and missile defense is multi-layered, and it includes various types of capabilities at different ranges and altitudes. So there is need and space for both more traditional capabilities such as Patriot systems or SAMT, but also obviously the sort of drones and counter drones capabilities to jam drones, to bring them down if needed, which we've seen put to such good effect in Ukraine. And I was at the Warsaw Security Forum recently, and it was really interesting to see how the focus in a way is changing from us as NATO, the EU, supporting Ukraine, to us learning from Ukraine, producing with Ukraine, and sharing innovation with Ukraine. And that's where the JTAC, the Joint Lessons Learned Center in Poland, between NATO allies and Ukraine, is a very important platform to exchange those lessons and to learn more from Ukraine and to produce more with Ukraine and in Ukraine.
And speaking of production and co-production, obviously during the Hague summit, the NATO allies have moved to ratify the 5% defense spending pledge. We're a couple of months after this summit. To what extent would you assess that this has been successful in implementation, and we can actually expect to see long-term effect of this pledge take effect at some point soon, or to what extent is just a ratification of a promise which will take once again 10 or 11 years for NATO allies, individual NATO allies to reach, to commit to?
In principle, NATO allies decided on a 10-year period, but of course I think everybody realizes this time is pressing and that Russia may be able to reconstitute its capabilities very quickly, within 2 to 3 or 4 years. And so I think the 5% pledge at the Hague summit is incredibly important. It was unimaginable even at the beginning of this year. So the fact that all allies were able to agree on that sends a very strong signal of determination. And we see, for instance, Germany as the engine of the European Union in economic terms and in financial terms, putting a lot of investment in defense. And that again is really unprecedented, and it it's a model to follow. And of course, Poland has been doing that for many years together with Baltic allies. So I think we're seeing a lot of effort, a lot of resources. It's important that it goes not just in conventional defense capabilities, but also in innovation and helping startups, for instance. But this, I think, sends also a message to the United States that the Europeans are taking their part in the defense, in the collective defense of Europe seriously. And that's an important political message.
And so finally, obviously you've mentioned Germany taking its defense spending very seriously. Do you expect that, should it come down to a particular European nation perhaps taking charge of NATO or European NATO-wide innovation, purchasing, procurement of equipment and joint development, would it, for example, be a role that Germany is looking to take on, or would it be another European nation which might be looking to lead this NATO defense charge on a European level?
I think it takes everybody because, of course, no single nation in Europe has even the financial might to have a full spectrum set of armed forces with enough mass in the capabilities that are needed for defense and deterrence. So I think everybody needs to contribute. But of course, countries in Europe will be looking to countries like Germany, France, Poland in particular, the UK, to sort of coalesce around specific projects and to do more, perhaps in smaller groups together, to develop specific capabilities, whether it's the next generation jet fighter or the next tank, or indeed the next types of drones. But I would say that there is this realization that Ukraine is really leading when it comes to innovation. This is warfare changing very fast and drawing a lot of innovation with it. So I think everybody also needs to look to Ukraine and to learn much faster from the Ukrainian experience. I think we're still a bit too slow and time is very short.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching from Ljubljana for TVP World. I'm Zuzanna Jurek.